Today's topic is Operation Homecoming. So this is the 50th anniversary of our Vietnam POWs repatriation back to the United States. We have a distinguished panel with us today, starting with Captain Charlie Plumb, lead aviator and Vietnam POW. We have Jim Hickerson, United States Navy, also a POW from Vietnam and and Susan Page, a wife of Captain John Coffey, U.S. Navy and POW buttons. So this is and we're going to start with kind of everyone in my age or older. We know who these folks are and what this event is. But for our younger folks who may not be fully aware of what happened, we have just a little bit of an intro here. So.
Well, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum and our special program with Captain Charles J. Plumb, U.S. Naval Academy graduate, naval aviator, and prisoner of war for 6 years in North Vietnam. Members of the United States Armed Forces were held as prisoners of war, also known as POWs, in significant numbers during the Vietnam War from 1964 to 1973. Unlike U.S. service members captured in World War II and the Korean War, who were mostly enlisted troops, the overwhelming majority of Vietnam-era POWs were officers, most of them Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps airmen. A relatively small number of Army enlisted personnel were also captured, as well as one enlisted Navyman, Petty Officer Doug Hegdahl, who fell overboard from a naval vessel. Most U.S. prisoners were captured and held in North Vietnam by the People's Army of Vietnam. As much smaller number were captured in the South and were held by the Viet Cong, also known as VC. A handful of U.S. civilians were also held captive during the war. 13 prisons and prison camps were used to house U.S. prisoners in North Vietnam. The most widely known was Ho Lo Prison, nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton. The treatment and ultimate fate of U.S. prisoners of war in Vietnam became a subject of widespread concern in the United States, and hundreds of thousands of Americans wore POW bracelets with the name and capture date of imprisoned U.S. service members. American POWs in North Vietnam were released in early 1973 as part of Operation Homecoming, the result of diplomatic negotiations concluding with the U.S. military involvement ending in the Vietnam War. On February 12, 1973, the first of 591 U.S. prisoners began to be repatriated, and return flights continued until March of that year. After Operation Homecoming, the U.S. still listed roughly 1,350 Americans as prisoners of war or missing in action, and sought the return roughly of 1,200 Americans reported killed in action, but whose bodies were not recovered. As you well know, we are still doing that with the identification lab right here in Honolulu. Without any further ado, I turn it over to my colleague next to me as he introduces our speakers.
We have a little bit of video that kind of takes you back 50 plus years to a deck of a Navy aircraft carrier getting ready to launch an alpha strike on North Vietnam. So let me see if I can make that. There. Put it. Oh. What am I in the party? Yeah. Good. I'm not thinking about it. I'm not believing that yet. I had seen it. I want to hide up for them. One. And I thought, I'm like, let's look back at you trying to. So, and this is still a bit. It's those things. Sorry, I need a pickup. I'll wait to get that. I was going to shut up. To go to the ring. I'm pushing wrench and it's about everything that the thing with them. But if England opens someone, we himself. And choose some government, and you after the go, I'll pass them. We put this and gun and I. Yeah, they do to us. Mirrors, you know, spend time. But let's spend alphabets into it. Let's end and and very emotional for many of us here, and certainly thought-provoking. So, Captain Plumb, can you share some thoughts with us about those days and your experience launching off the kicking off?
Sure. It was the 19th of May, 1967, and I was on the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk, the same carrier that Cecil Coffey's husband took off a year earlier for me, the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. And the target was a ammunition dump just south of Hanoi. I was hit by a surface-to-air missile on my radar intercept option, my co-pilot back seat, and I ejected from the F-4 Phantom. Parachutes opened, and we came floating down over enemy territory. The bad news, we were shot down. The good news was we were close to Hanoi. The guys who were shot down in Laos or Cambodia or even in the mountains, so Vietnam, a lot of those guys didn't make it because the war was still on and we were still bombing and they were still shooting. And so I was very close. It was just a Jeep ride into the Wallow prison camp we called the Hanoi Hilton. I was tortured for 2 days for military information and political propaganda, tossed into a little 8-foot by 8-foot cell. And I was in that cell and in 6 other prison camps for the next 2,103 days. So that, that's basically the story of Charlie Plumb and the prison camp. And I can go into it further as you would like with your questions. I was repatriated in February of 1973, came through Honolulu here. And of course, this is the first time we touched down on American soil. And we came through Clark Air Force Base, the Philippines, for 2 days, and then flew here into Hawaii, where we started our journey back home. I was in a hospital at the Great Lakes Naval Hospital for about 3 or 4 weeks, debriefing and fixing the up. I was some of the internal parasites and things that I had going on. I, as 90% of the POWs who did stayed in the military, which I think is pretty astounding. As has been told you, most of us were fighter pilots. And so in trying to compare our story with the story of POWs in Korea or World War II, we were kind of a different breed. We were nearly 100% officers. We were college graduates. We were pretty much dedicated military guys, whereas a lot of the other POWs from other wars were inductees, and they were not lifer kind of military guys, which gave us I think a leg up on them. The other thing that allowed us to survive and even thrive, and statistically, this is kind of interesting, statistically, 500 9/11ers came home. The
And then the psychiatrists, psychologists in and out of the military thought we'd be in baskets. They thought we'd be vegetables. Carole may be able to speak to this because she, of course, was the husband of Jim Hickerson, my buddy here. Jim and I were in the same prison cell for about a year. And they told our wives that we were probably going to be mentally ill. And they came up. And after 6, 7, 8.5 years, as an opera, as you would kind of expect a guy to be nutty. And in fact, my first interview at Clark Air Force Base with a psychiatrist, and he told me that my wife had filed for divorce just 3 months before I was shot down. I mean, before I came home. So she held on for over 5 years and filed for divorce. And so he told me that, and he said, how do you feel? I said, I'm free for the first time in 6 years, feel pretty good. He said, well, what am I doing right? Well, I'm sorry about that, but I'm still free. And so he said, well, you need to get angry, I mean, we've studied the POWs by the war, so we know that you have PTSD and all this stuff. And he said, you have the right to be bitter. I said, doctor, I have the right to have diarrhea. I choose not to be bitter, thank you very much. And so we came back, and 90% of us stayed in the military. From 591 men, we have produced 17 generals, 7 admirals from our number. Most of us retired as senior grade military officers. We have CEOs of big corporations, doctors, lawyers, preachers, teachers, bishops, judges, several mayors, several congressmen, 2 United States senators. We have 2 ambassadors from our number at 591. We have doctors. We have 2 senators. My old flight instructor, Charlie Plumb, showed up 5 months after I was there. We have, of course, a vice presidential candidate and a presidential candidate for 591 men. So our story is really a very positive story. And the fact that you can go through an adverse situation like we went through and actually come out better and not bitter. And so we're pretty proud to be alive and well and have the doorknob on the inside of our door by Jim. On the outside.
Well, my story is tad different. Shot down December the 22nd, 1967. And was a prisoner, obviously. And my wife found somebody else while I was gone. So when I got back, we got to board Friday after I got back. And Carole, we had heard of Carole because Carole had been into a while, and she was well known. Let's just put it that way. So
Let's put it wild.
she had a date with a very good friend of mine. First time I met her, and he was ex-POW also. And as a matter of fact, we walked home after that, didn't we?
Well, you were very attentive.
But I was very, very lucky. I was very, very, very lucky. And I consider myself being very lucky to be able to come back and be able to sit here and talk for you all about it. It was not pleasant. It certainly wasn't any fun. But now that it's over, I look back on it with a lot of good memories, a lot of good friends, and a very happy marriage that came out of. So I'm a very lucky man.
Yeah, we can. Well, then I can hear Carole, while these 2 naval aviators were tied up in Hanoi, what was it that you were involved in back stateside? I remember, I was a young boy at the time, but I remember, and in your name.
Well, I'll kind of start at the beginning. I wasn't married to you. I was married to a Marine Corps pilot, Steve Hanton, and we were told by the government I found out he was shot down. I was teaching school at the time. My principal called me, and I was very positive that Steve was going to come home. But the principal, acting like nothing was, okay. Yeah, I will start over again. I was teaching school. I was very positive in my thinking, said, prayers every day that he would come home, Steve, my first husband. But the principal called me into his office, and I didn't even suspect anything then. And there were, what threw me was 2 Marine Corps officers in their men's dress, or in their dress uniform. And I remember the exact words. It was, "We're not here to tell you that your husband's been killed. We're here to tell you that your husband is missing in action." And it was like, he's alive. They're going to find him. Might take a couple of days, but they're going to find him. And of course, the days went on, and the months went on, and the years went on. But the hardest part was right from the beginning. We were told, and it was government policy, that we, for the sake of our husbands, if Steve had ended up being in a POW camp, which there was every possibility, even though he was officially listed as missing in action, we were not to talk about it. And we could, harm our husbands if we did. So I was a, patriotic, good Marine wife, and I did what I was told, and I didn't talk to anybody. I had neighbors that, I didn't even talk to my neighbors, my family, of course, but, I couldn't keep it when he didn't come home when he was supposed to. And so time went on. There was no one else in the area where I lived that was another POW or MIA wife. And down in San Diego, there were a number of wives that got together, but I was totally alone. And the not knowing and the loneliness is what prompted me to start what I did. And so of course, we didn't have, all the technology we had then. I had an old typewriter, and I typed out a letter and sent it to 350 newspapers explaining the situation, that the North Vietnamese weren't following the Geneva Convention, and explained a little bit about my husband's situation, and asked people in my letter to write their congressmen and senators, and to the president, also the president of North Vietnam. One of the good things that came out of that for me is that, and I'd taken out a P.O. box number, I started getting letters from other wives from all over the country. And that was just a big help to me as far as having some support from somebody else that was in the same situation. And so little by little, we started kind of a loosely knit organization, which led to the National League of Families, which some of you have probably heard of. I was on the ground floor. We met in Washington, and we had the good help. We were, teachers, wives, stay-at-home moms. We had done a lot of all of it, things we ended up doing. But a lawyer by the name of Charlie Havens, he helped us put together the National League, so it was a nonprofit 501 organization. So besides, just uniting and becoming an organization which got a lot more attention than a single wife did, we were able to raise some money for our meager pocketbooks. There's a big help. I will answer the questions you might have as far as some of the things I did along the way, but that was the very beginning. And, I ended up spending time with a couple of the presidents, and walked into offices of senators and congressmen, some of them very receptive, some of them not. Was locked up in Russia for a while on a round-the-world trip, but I'll turn it over to Susan now, and she can give you a little bit of her story, and then all of us will be open to questions afterward.
Susie, can you pick up the Is talking
Okay. Can you hear me, everybody? Okay, I'm not finished with Carole's story. Carole has a huge story, and I hope you get to read her book one day if it's ever written. I got to write a column about Carole. I'm a journalist, and I wrote for Midweek. It's a newspaper here for 24 years, and I always want to know the why of everything. But Carole designed, she's an artist, and she designed the logo that's on the flag you see underneath the American flag every day. It's a POW flag, the man with his head down and the barbed wire behind him. That is Carole's, and that's one of the things she did. Yes. And that's the symbolic of the contribution she made, not to mention all the things she said, and there's a whole huge story. And I think my husband died 2 years ago. I wasn't his wife during Vietnam. He had a family, a wonderful family, and they're my family now. His wife kept his wife be, the memory of her, and thinking about her kept him alive all those years. And sadly, they were not able, as many POWs, in fact, most of the POWs did not stay with their first wife, their wife that was their wife while they were in prison. And these are from studies. I didn't make it up. So I came along later, but I got to know Jerry. I guess I should tell you this story because it's kind of interesting. My first husband that I married in 1967 was a fighter pilot. He was a Marine Corps fighter pilot, and we married in Japan during his Vietnam tour. So I was kind of involved and enmeshed in the Vietnam War from the get-go. I was 20, and I think one of the things I want to bring out, because it's interesting to me, is I feel so honored to be involved or sitting next to the left of these people here. Of course, Jim and Charlie, but my husband was another one, and actually my first husband had the right stuff, and that's what they talk about. You've heard it talked about in the astronaut arena, but there are some characteristics of guys that fly planes like they fly and flew during the Vietnam War, and also continue to do that. It's very specific, and it's also not anecdotal. This has been studied. It's now kind of empirical evidence that there is something about these guys, and there's something about it I like a lot, because I was married to two of them. I did my own study. But anyway, I would just say my first husband, John Ditto, we were stationed eventually in Washington, D.C., comes home one day, hates Washington. He wants to get back in a squadron. He's miserable. He wants to he's been promised to come into squadron, and then he gets orders to the National War College, which is in Fort McNair in Washington. You might be familiar with that, and he can't turn it down. I mean, he wanted to, but he couldn't for his career's sake. And he comes home that first day at class, and he says, "I've met the greatest guy I've ever met." And he wasn't a guy who would talk like that. He didn't suffer fools. He was a serious guy. Fun, but serious. And I thought, that's unusual. His name is Jerry Coffee, he said. So I said, okay, I'll make my Mexican casserole and we'll have him over. And comes to find out, I fell in love with him too. So my husband and I were both in love with Jerry Coffee. So fast forward, sounds weird and son, like today people would think, but we both were. And just about everybody I knew fell in love with Jerry Coffee. My mother was in love with him. My sister was in love with him. My mother had a special way of saying his name, Jerry. And, it really was weird, because when I'd call to her and say, "I'm coming to see you on," she was in Denver or Boulder, and she'd say, "Is Jerry coming?" I'd say, "No, Mom, I'm just going to come. He can't go." Jerry can't come. So that's kind of indicative of how everybody felt about Jerry Coffee. And so sadly, very, very sadly, about 2-3 years later, when we were back in the U.S., after a tour in Japan with my first husband, he died in a Harrier, and left me as a widow and 2 children. And so I reconnected with Jerry, because the casualty assistance officer found him so he could be a pallbearer, because I knew that he was probably at the top of the list of who my husband admired in his life and would want to be there then. And so that's how we kind of got reconnected. Fast forward a couple of years later, I'd lived in Dallas for a while with my kids, and then I moved to Hawaii. That's where Jerry and his family lived. I started a business, and life, went on. And one day Jerry called, and as it turned out, he was divorced, and I was available as well. And we saw each other differently. That first falling in love changed into really falling in love. And so we were together for 30 years. Well, unbeknownst to me, he would belly laugh at this because he had the greatest laugh ever, but that, he had just had a heart attack and he was 57 years old. So I laughed. I told him, I said, you're kind of damaged goods. What do I get out of this? Joking about the POW issues, but as life went along with Jerry, I will tell you this. He had 4 heart attacks, 3 strokes. He had a condition called normal pressure hydrocephalus, which was caused based on the experts at Johns Hopkins Medical Center, the shoot down, the ejection seat brain concussion that he had when he was shot down into the Tonkin Gulf off of the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. Same thing, Charlie. Airplane Charlie flew February 3rd, 1966, the first pilot to get shot down in 1966, and that was when one of the purges began. So he never really got to recover. He was put in front of a firing squad. He was hung from a tree. This is no news to you guys. Batted about with his broken arm and his crushed elbow and all that, and stuffed. They got his teeth knocked out with a rifle butt. All that was at the very, very beginning. And but I didn't see the damaged goods. I just was joking because he had a heart attack. But again, he had all these other things. So what I've been interested in as I became his caregiver later in life is how much of that, of his issues, his medical issues, was brought about by his time as a prisoner of war. Okay. And we could talk about it later because I'm not an expert on this at all, but I think it's very interesting that the Navy came up with a study to study these guys, like lab rats. They came to Pensacola every year to be studied because they wanted to find out all they could of this kind of personality, this right stuff personality, and how they responded to prison. So I'm rambling a little bit right now.
Well, let's kind of go from that line of thought and ask Charlie and Jim. So when you're repatriated, when you come back to the States and you're continuing your Navy careers, how do you do that? How do you get back on flight status? How do you get back into an airplane? How do you continue on?
Well, it's pretty easy for me. I love to fly and wanted to continue to fly. And so I just, as most of us did, that's why we thought about it a lot in the prison camps that we planned to do when we came back, and that's what we did. Some of the guys went into the airlines, but most of them stayed in the reserves to fly the reserves as well and supply the airlines. But we were in the hospital for a while. We went back to Pensacola for this annual physical that Susan's talking about, which was built by a wonderful, wonderful doctor down there that cared for us. And he promised us that he would never pull our wings. The Air Force had a similar program, but their doctors did not make that promise. And their doctors pulled a lot of wings where Dr. Mitchell, our hero, said, I'm never going to pull your wings. So the Air Force program lasted 2 years. And ours is in its 51st year next year, just because of this doctor that was going to take care of us, which he did. But it was a study of lab rats. Yeah, remember some of those first experiences, Jim, where they tied you on to a spinning wheel and pouring hot water in one ear and cold water in the other ear, and testing your, what they call vestibular functions. We're a bunch of knuckle dragger fighter, but we don't know what vestibular functions are. But they tested us for everything. I mean, all these experiments, and And in fact, about the second or third years, hey, doc, that's what the experience was. Let's get all of some medical stuff. And then, so they take really good care of us. And of course, we were pretty competitive. And so, it was who got the farthest to the treadmill machine. They got the level 6 on this end. And we still had pretty good eyes. We had 20/20 vision. And we're looking at the eye chart. And as the years went on, as our vision started to deteriorate in our 30s and 40s, I began cheating on the eye chart just so I could compete with these guys. And so they'd make glasses and send them home, and they never worked. And I thought, I completely, the Navy does not know how to make these glasses. What the heck? It's still over about 5 years, okay, until my wife said, go down to the lens crafters, get, Emma Civilian, make your glasses. Of course, I didn't lie to the lens crafter because I'm paying money there, right? And then it's the first time I realized that because I was lying on the eye chart, no way if a Navy make good glasses for me.
I just like to add one little thing there. One thing, and they were so competitive. They really were. And on the treadmill, at the end of the treadmill, they had a very large picture of a rather voluptuous woman, about half closed. And if you don't think that encouraged them to stay longer at my and one thing more serious, Dr. Mitchell told them that if they were, of course, wanting to get as many of the POWs as they could, and they offered it to the wives, too, if the wives came along. And so I went down with Jim every single year and had an absolutely tremendous, physical by the people there in Pensacola. I got up on the treadmill also, I didn't look on it.
Well, Charlie and Jim, had our country changed when you come back? Had the military changed? Had the Navy changed? From your perspective, what was different? Same, or?
I can mention one thing that told me way back when. He, of course, his antenna was up because his wife, had left him. And he would drive by another car and he'd see this long hair, a beautiful lawn. And when he'd get a little closer, he'd find out it was a guy. He jumped around. No, don't think these.
It wasn't her.
Jerry used to talk about bell bottoms. I mean, they went, everything was pretty conservative in 1965, 1966. I mean, I remember very well. And then there were bell bottoms and long hair and colored hair and blue watering the toilet bowl.
See, Thompson, that build up. The lad pants, yeah. You were lad pants.
Yeah, they were very colorful in the 70s, if I recall.
I don't remember any of that.
Yeah, Jerry about that. Jerry went to, he got to go back to school and he opted for a master's degree at Berkeley. And imagine what he saw coming right out of Vietnam and, being there only 7 years, and the conversations they had in between classes. And just because Jerry was who he was and so positive, and he really wanted to listen to what had happened in those 7 years. He really did a lot of listening versus talking. And I think that won them over to listen to him. But there were a lot of changes. I think I would say, Charlie, don't you remember a lot of changes?
Well, yeah.
That's not nothing.
And one of the two or three big things that were really apparent was instant replay. I watched the football. Hey, wait a minute, they just made that play and the same result. And say it was Billis and you put up a But it was like Rip Van Winkle waking up after 6 or 7 or 8.5 years of outright. But because we had very little communication with the states for a long time, we would not know who the president was, who won the World Series, any of that stuff. In fact, we were some of the last people on Earth that didn't know that we put a man on the moon in 1969. And the way I found out about it, and it was November, I guess, of 1969. And they gave us a lot of propaganda. It was all this this news from ASK agency, and it was in English, and a lot of the guys wouldn't read it, but I thought it was kind of interesting, and so they slipped this newspaper out to the north, and the headline was, Soviet Union finally beats the United States in the space race. That's interesting. This was a period of time, in the 60s when, in fact, I marched in Kennedy's inauguration parade, and I marched 3 years later by his casket. But Kennedy said, we will bomb out on the moon, this decade. And a lot of us signed up for the astronaut program. So there were a lot of POWs were actually involved in astronauts. And so we were very interested in the program. And so I thought, wait, this is really interesting. It's finally beat the space race. And so what did Tareev said, not since Sputnik 1 has the Soviet Union been farther ahead of the United States in the space race. We have launched a vehicle onto the moon, gathered samples, taken pictures, blasted off, returned to the States, and unlike the Americans, we didn't have to put a man aboard to control the vehicle. And I couldn't believe what I read. And so, we're tapping on the walls. We had this tap code. We tap on the walls. That was our secret code. And I tapped it on to the guys next door, to the cell next door. And I could hear through the wall these guys says, hoot and holler, because we realized that we'd finally put it out of the moon. And what a motivational thing it was for all of us to think that, that something had been done, while we were there. That was so encouraging to all of us. So, cool.
I remember, Giannis, one of you guys, I can't recall who it was now, but he and his roommate, they had just found out about the moon landing, and they had to go empty their buckets or something, and they went outside from their cell. And the cells were, I think, about 8 feet by 8 feet, something like that. Anyway, that was so wonderful just to be able to take a breath air. But they heard about the moon landing, and they stood there in the moonlight and saluted the flag. And I got that picture in my mind. Yeah.
At the same time, they were, you got that news. Weren't you guys getting terrible news about America through this loudspeaker coming into your cells constantly, trying to demoralize you and propagandize you against your own country? And a couple of people did take the bait on that one, Ed Miller and a couple of others, yeah. So you want to talk about that? And also Kennedy, RFK died and Martin Luther King died during the time you were there, and of course they wanted you to be discouraged about that.
Yeah, every cell had a speaker in it. The speaker was up on the wall, or we could adjust it, turn it off. And every morning we would say, we would hear, "Good morning, American Air Pirates." This is the voice of Vietnam, and it was a lady, okay, and we call her Hanton. Like Tokyo Rose in World War II. We just named Hannah and American Air Pirates. We thought, she's Asian, didn't think she could pronounce L's, so she was called pirates instead of pilots. And so she would say, obdurate American Air Pirates. Remember that? Well, we didn't know what I remember, and we're dumb fighter pilots. We don't American. We didn't think she did either. So early one morning, we hear this American voice, this sexy American voice we recognized. It was Jane Fonda. And Jane said in her sexy voice, "Good morning, obdurate American Air Pirates." We didn't think she knew what obdurate meant either. And she was just reading a script, of air pirates. So, they fed us an awful lot of propaganda. It worked with their people, the communist way, was just to hammer these lies that they were telling. But but it was pretty obvious to us because some of the stuff was unbelievable. You know, it was like, 200,000 students, march at Austin, Texas, and crazy things. But they did tell us about people, being shot and hurricanes, any bad news. And of course, every day they were locking down, 100 pilots and killing another 1,000 soldiers. So it was a lot of propaganda being fed to us that it never really works.
I remember Jim saying that, if they had shot down the number of planes that they contended that they did shoot down, I mean, there wouldn't have been a flying U.S. plane in the sky.
Well, how did the North Vietnamese attitude change, if at all, during 1972 linebacker when the B-52s came to Saigon?
Well, they were very afraid of the big bombers. Jim and I could fly in our airplanes, and they didn't even get out of the bed. But the B-52s came in, the linebacker too, and they really were frightened. And so we, 2 or 3 things we think were responsible for the end of the war, but certainly linebacker too was one of them. So it kind of changed their attitude. But you could see the mentality of these soldiers changed in how the war was going. If there was a lot of bombing going on, and then of course the bombing stopped, and the peace talk, the Paris peace talks, and Carole, you probably got involved in some of that, didn't you?
Well, yes, a group of wives went to Paris, and both dropped off just hundreds of letters of the American people. Of course, the Vietnamese wouldn't see us, and I was in Vientiane, Laos with 3 other wives, and they, because we were in Laos, and Steve was shot down in Laos, I had to sit outside the meeting room. They wouldn't even let me be a part of that particular meeting, which again was all propaganda. But just so you got kind of the bottom line of what the wives were trying to do, we couldn't bring them along. And we stuck together. We were not the anti-war wives or college students that were out there. We all, as military wives, we basically supported our government. And even if we disagreed with something the government was doing, I always said when I was chairman of the league, sure, express your opinions about how you feel about something, but do it behind closed doors. Because the media was our avenue to bring the message of the POWs to the American people. And I don't think we'll ever go back as far as prisoners looked at by our country as a whole, because they got so involved in these guys. It was just amazing the amount of love, concern, prayers, and all that was said for these. And, I have to say the wives did a lot to make all that happen. The POW bracelets, I was sitting in a room with a conservative college group in Southern California universities, and we were sitting there trying to think of something we could do to involve more American people. And a gentleman by the name of Bob Jordan, who was a fighter pilot of the Air Force, some of the others know the name, he got very much involved in the POW issue, and he had on a bracelet from a Montagnards tribesman because he'd been in Vietnam. And he told this, Montagnard that he was going to wear that bracelet. It was just a little silver or copper bracelet. And he said, I'm going to wear this till the war's over. Well, we heard that, and there was the reader of the Reeve, it was called, and 2 or 3 of the students from the university, and I can't even remember who brought up the subject first, but gee, that would be a great thing for us to try. So the POW bracelet was born in that room, and myself and 3 other gals gave permission, which the family had to give permission to use the name on a bracelet. And that involved so many thousands of people when people started wearing POW bracelets. Jim just got one back from a gal that I think it was Virginia, and she worn it all those years. And you used to be able to tell if it had been worn much because ones that had been put on a shelf or in a closet someplace, they look kind of pristine like when they'd first gotten them. And hers was all worn on the inside, so you knew that she had worn it, which made you feel good. I think they sold for $2 a piece. And the airlines were very good pilots. Of course, it had more ties to ace pilots than just the average American, and they would take the bracelets on board and offer them to passengers on their way someplace. But give every bracelet it'll hold, and they'll bring it and some.
Just a point in our program, we're going to do some questions and answers with our audience. So if you have a question you'd like to ask our esteemed panel, I'll bring the microphone over to you and we'll see what we got. Any questions from our folks?
Right over here.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here today and to hear of your exploits, and it's just a catharsis to feel that so much good has come out of Operation Homecoming. I'm Colonel Lord Bradley, retired Army. But back in the day, I was a first lieutenant ground pounder with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. I saw many interesting things along that particular journey. And after I came home, and I saw the POW flag, it became like a burning timber in my soul. I came upon a book that was written by former U.S. Representative Bill Hanton and Elizabeth Stewart, and they co-authored a book called An Enormous Crime, the definitive account of American POWs abandoned in Southeast Asia. Senator McCain went on to say it was hurtful and damaging to do something like that. But the stories continue. So I guess my comment would be, do you feel that our government at the time did as much as possible to bring home those who were still listed as being missing over there? That's my question.
One of the big issues, the MIA issue, was the status of these guys, because they were declared as missing in action if we couldn't prove they were dead. Well, I personally have seen airplanes go down at sea or in deep jungle where there's not even any smoke, there's not any fire, there's no debris, there's nothing that can ever be found that you can't prove that the guy didn't jump out at the last minute and survive. And then Ross Perot was one of our big supporters, and he got us all together and he said, we're going to go look for those missing in action. And we might have dozen of us gathered in Dallas and said, we'll spend a year trying to do this. And he said, I'll spend all the money I got trying to feed these guys down. We started out by dropping leaflets all over Southeast Asia, offering $1 million and a trip to the United States and citizenship for anybody who could prove to us this was American missing in Vietnam. And it sounded like a pretty good idea, right? But all these people showed up with rubbings of dog tags, photocopies of ID cards, and said, here, this guy's missing. Oh, we found him. It was $1 million. Well, because of freedom of information, we had to share this with families. So we had a lot of families that were thinking that these guys were still alive, but we knew for sure that they were dead. So it was a real struggle for a lot of us. We sent soldiers of fortune back into the jungle. They knew that if they came back empty-handed, they weren't going to be paid or sent back into the jungle. They'd lose their job if they didn't find some evidence. And so they came up with all this phony evidence of living Americans. So on answer to short question, is I think the government really did and continues to do a all they can to find these guys. But in reality, we'll never really know. We really never know. A lot was missing in action. For them, mysteriously jumped out of the airplane the last minute, and they still are alive today. But we just really don't think that there's anybody living in America. And that was a tough thing for me because, these ladies would come back, these gals would come back and say, well, my guy was shot down. What do you think? He's missing in action. I said, was there a parachute? No parachute. Was there a signal from the ground, a radio or anything at all? No. No. But we still think he's alive, and we're praying for him, just like your family prayed for you. So we think he's got to come home. And it was tough for us to face that issue.
I was on the receiving end of that, and for some time after the end of the hostilities and all you all came home, and it was after Jim and I had gotten married, there were charlatans out there that would contact the families of the missing in action. And of course, it involved a check or money sent to them because they were pretty sure that Steve was, he was shot down in Laos, and there's more of a chance he's in some prison in Laos, and if he'd even been shot down in Vietnam. And it was tough. And I can remember Jim saying, gee, if Steve comes home, I'll step aside. But it caused heartache in the families at whole that should never have been, just should never have been. But there's always somebody out there that's ready to take advantage of people, So, and one thing I'll just add, and some of the families that hung on, hoping and hoping, and hey, you do that just natural. You just, without, I always said there's, people don't realize how important a funeral is till you never have one. But there were mothers that passed it on to their children. We were at the wall one time, several years later, and there was a young man. I had known him as about a 5-year-old. I knew his mom real well, and she was an MIA wife. And she had passed it on to her children, and Steve would never have wanted to pass it on to his son to spend his whole life, going after, someone that wasn't there. I mean, it wasn't until 2000 that Steve's remains came home. But that's a long time to pass it on to your children, that it consumes their lives as well as, the spouses.
The Joint Task Force for Full Accounting, I don't know when that was established, but that was a great thing because that was a mandate to go and find to leave no stone unturned, to find every bit of the remains. And Carole, I know you got his remains at one point. And what year was that?
Not till 2000. They shot down in 1967.
But that program is still here. And I know one day we were in our office, and these very excited guys from the what is that acronym? Anyway, Joint Task Force.
Yeah, thank you.
Said, "Oh, we've got something for you, Captain Coffee. We've got something for you," and they were really excited. And they came over and they had these pieces of his airplane and the serial number that they had found. They were looking for a pilot because they're not designated to go and find airplanes. They're not going to crash sites to bring home parts of airplanes. But they did bring it to him because they did identify that. But they were looking for an F-4 pilot. And so they brought all these pictures and that whole operation going up. It was quite an operation to go out to his airplane. But for him, because he had such a bad concussion when he was shot down, it was an affirmation that his airplane was still sitting there in the water, pretty shallow water at that point. And, for no other reason, and then sad for the F-4 pilot that they didn't find, but hopefully later. But anyway, that's just my take on that. But I did read The Charm School, and it made me believe, if all of you ever read The Charm School by Nelson DeMille, it made the fictional case that they took all these pilots from Hanoi up to Russia to train them to be slides, to try to imitate them. It's a good book. Gotta read it.
Another question.
Is how many POWs at the camps that you were at that you know of died there, and can you share any of the circumstances? Everybody feel that bit fun.
How many died in the prison camps that we know of? Where? Personally, I don't know anybody that I know for sure died. Some of the guys disappeared and never came back. But really there were very few. And we were in a lot of different camps, and we tried to memorize the names. Of course, the sailor fell off the ship. Gagno memorized all of our names. And so we tried to keep track to make sure that they didn't hold anybody back after the war. But I think the statistic is the 27 guys who died in the prison camp in some way. Yeah, I think that's right.
I think there were a few that tried to escape, and they were really tortured when they got captured.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of hard for a Caucasian man to wander around in the middle and not be expected, and he shouldn't be here, sir. So I think there weren't that many, but you have to realize too that these guys are bargaining chips, and they wanted to torture them and make their lives miserable, but they didn't really care about them petitions.
It'd be a lot if I could ask the last question from our two naval aviators here. How well do you, in retrospect, how well prepared were you for POW captivity? The code of conduct, your training that you received, do you feel that you were adequately prepared?
I think we were prepared to need POWs. Was we good? Well, training to be a POW is like practicing leading. You have a lead.
How's the practice?
And I went to 4 different series schools. Jim, you probably went to 2 or 3 at least. We all went to these SEREs, Survival Escape Resistance Evasion schools. And, they take you out and have eat bugs for a while, and they put you in a box and capture you and brush you up a little bit. The difference was you always knew Saturday morning you'd be back with the wife and kids and no good rallies. So you knew there was the end to the practice. And the difference in the POW is we never knew when it was going to end. And, just on and on forever. One of the mistakes I think that was made in our training was that the simulated POW scenario was Delta World War II and Korean Prisoners of War, where it was a compound. It was guys in a big fenced-out area. They're out there, playing basketball or walking around the compound. And we were in jail cells. And the entire time we were there, it was a locked cell that we were in. So we weren't allowed outside. And so to me, that was probably the biggest discrepancy in the training that I had was going into a situation where I kept waiting for them to let me out into the compound with the rest of the guys, and they never did. So when we came back, we went back through all these survival schools and sort of rebuilt the curriculum there to make it more like what we did in Vietnam. But then now it's different now than it was in Vietnam. So again, it's tough to train to be a prisoner of war.
Yeah. And
Anything else?
Yes, sir.
And several South Vietnamese officers who got re-educated after the war for about 8 years. And they were everybody was tortured. Were all of you people at one time or another kind of systematically tortured?
From the very beginning until about a year before the end of the war. Well, when the bracelets came out, that Carole was so instrumental in designing, and that's probably at the same time Ho Chi Minh died, and the torture stopped about that time. So the last 2 or 3 years, there was very little torture. when the first 5 or 6 years, we were all tortured. The only guys that didn't know they were tortured were passed out. They didn't remember what had happened, and so yeah, we were all.
Well, it was systematically, even if you did nothing wrong, they had to torture you anyway. Like in the Marine Corps, they used to beat up everybody. Yeah. And they had to beat you up before you got out.
Can you describe the torture? Do you mind describing what the torture was?
Okay. You want to tell about torture? Well, I'm going to demonstrate it on you. The main torture was called the rope trick. We call it rope trick. It was an old-fashioned torture that we've been using for many, many years, where they put shackles on your ankles and run a bar through the shackle. But manacles, really, really tight handcuffs on your wrist behind your back. And they take a rope and run it from your ankles up over your shoulder and back down to your wrists. Then they would tighten up this rope, like stick a bamboo in there and ratchet this rope to the point that your feet were right up in your face, and your elbows, your shoulders now around a joint, and your wrists. I remember looking back and seeing my wrists backwards above my head. So you're just wadded up like a shoulder pressing. And then if they still didn't get their answer, they would take the whole thing from the rope and tie another rope and wrap it around a hook in the ceiling and hoist you up on this rock. So you're hanging in that wadded up position. So that was the rope train. The other one was whips. They would take whips from one side to side, and they come in and strip naked and face down, and they would whip from side to side. So it was painful for sure. But again, as Carole said, they knew that we were going to be bargaining chips at the end of the war. So they knew they didn't want to kill us. And it's pretty obvious. And to tell you the truth, it was a real relief when I thought I was just about dead. And they loosened the ropes. That was a joy to my heart. And just said, I knew that they didn't want to kill me.
Do you mind if I add? Because in this study, that the joint and ligament injuries, musculoskeletal issues were some of the things that the POWs versus the control groups are way, way off the charts. And to this day, you still feel some remnants of that. Jerry would wake up in the morning and he couldn't have any feelings in his hands still, 50 years later. And after a while, it would be that way. And I know it in his book, he talked about being 2 or 3 days before he could get any feelings in his arms and his hands. And torture, I think being in leg stocks and with your arms tied behind you for weeks and weeks and sometimes months is torture. I'd say.
Of course, Charlie King, could never comb his own hair. All of our shoulders were out of joint, but his were really out of joint, and so he couldn't lift his arms above shoulder height.
And the purposes torture was to break your spirit and your fidelity.
Primarily, Ho Chi Minh said in the very beginning that he's going to bring us back down to a basic animal and rebuild us as communists. And so that was basically it was to break our spirit. Now, they were asking questions of us. Some military questions. The first question that you asked most of us was, what's the next target to get by your air wing? And they didn't tell us what future targets were on the while we were on. And so, I told the truth for a while and finally decided I got to get out of this torture. I'll lie to them. I told them the next target to be hit by my air wing was going to be the Hanoi Brewery. I thought it was going to destroy the morale of their soldiers. And I figured it'd work in the U.S. Navy. So, but we learned to lie to them. It was kind of interesting because we had to coordinate our lives, and so we would show them and want to know members of our squadron, and give them the lineup of the Cubs baseball team.
Common.
You know, we actually had a lot of fun with the guards and playing little tricks like that on them. Teaching them words that were bad words. Never that, I didn't know they were bad words.
Well, I know that, besides being strong and resilient and all those things, they all had a good sense of humor too.
Well, we've been here for more than an hour. I know we could probably go for many more hours, but I want to thank our panel from the depth of my heart and for being with us today. And maybe Dave.
Well, I would like to thank the audience for coming.
So on behalf of everyone here at the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, indeed, thank you for all for being with us. You make these programs possible. We will have more in the calendar year 2024. Our panel will be with us for a few minutes afterwards if you'd like to meet them. Until then.
And we have books.
We have books. Yeah, there's a lot.
Signed. Yeah, and so this is first of many of these types of activities we'll have here, and we really thank you for coming today. And
And Merry Christmas.